So good morning, and today's devotional starts with this prayer. If I stand, let me stand on your promise. If I fall, let me fall on your grace. I take it back. It says, if I stand, let me stand on your promise. When I fall, let me fall on your grace. And I think that's a great reminder that falling and screwing up is a central part of what it means to follow Christ. It's this acknowledgement of our own brokenness. The passage in the Old Testament this morning that we looked at was from Exodus 34, and in verses 29 through 32, there's this cool depiction of Moses, and he had been in the presence of God. And in Exodus 34, starting with verse 29, it says, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near him, and he gave them all the commandments the Lord had given them on Mount Sinai. I thought it was interesting that Moses is there in the presence of God, and after being in God's presence, he comes, and he doesn't realize it, but his face is radiant, and the people were afraid. It's sort of it results in this interaction or this response from people that Moses had this intimate interaction with God himself, and it resulted in others seeing how he was different and having a very palpable and visceral response. And I just, it raises the question, I thought, for us this morning: how might we seek to be intimately engaged with God and have those moments of engaging with God on a regular basis, maybe even a daily basis, like, a daily devotional type of thing, but that our engagement and intimate interactions with God might inspire others. Moses himself was unaware of how he had changed, and yet to be in God's presence it's overwhelming so much that we're different and we don't even necessarily realize it, but other people see something different, and it's palpable. It inspires emotion, and in this case, it inspired fear. And I don't think that's necessarily what we're aiming for. We don't necessarily want to have like a really deep, time of silence or prayer or scripture reading or worship or whatever it might be, and then walk out and have people fearing us. I don't think that's necessarily what we're going for, but the idea that being engaged with God's presence changes us, and changes us to the extent that people see that something's different and are changed and are different because of it. So it made me thinking, as far as like radiant of his face glowing and all that stuff. I remember years ago, Brian Bajari, myself, Maddie, a handful of friends of ours were, we had this ministry where we would meet in a bar, and it was really like all we tried to do was to be present, was to engage in conversations and relationships and just be there. And there were moments where I kind of like had this feeling of like, man, I don't know if anything's different. I don't know if we're like doing anything really. All we're doing is just sitting talking with people. And then, over time in conversations came to realize and we hear from people that the night that we would show up, all the regulars started to understand that they started calling it church night. And I didn't even realize that was like a thing, that they even knew that we were like really part of a church. But the fact that we were there and we just operated differently, like that we did things differently, that we treated people with respect, that, you know, that there was a genuine care and concern for other people, that we would listen. That was like one of the big things, that we would talk with people and we would just listen instead of engaging in conversation just so that we could be heard. And it was this realization, you know, where you know, in scripture it talks about, in John chapter 1 in particular, it talks about the light coming and shining in darkness, and the darkness didn't understand it. And we realized that we didn't necessarily even understand or know how what we were doing was being noticed and how it was affecting other people. But by simply just being, you know, quote unquote, light in darkness, it had this like palpable effect, and people were changed, were affected by it, you know. And even to one point where, you know, we were talking with the owner of the bar one day, and we said, hey, you know, we're not going to be here next week. So remember this one time where we went and started, we shared with the bar owner that we wouldn't be there the following week, and we told him why, and we were going on this mission trip to Uganda actually, and we started telling him why, and about some of the story of what had happened in that country, civil war and child soldiering and all that stuff. And all of a sudden he just starts crying. He starts weeping. He says, you're breaking my heart. Like, I can't believe that this is happening. And, you know, and then it was this interesting, you know, really from that point on, after we got back, I mean, he started living into his own, sort of disciplines of hospitality, and he started feeding us like every week, and then he started feeding more and more people, and it was this like beautiful expression of we were just doing what we were doing, but that sort of ways in which God had been, you know, moving in our heart, soul, mind, and strength. You know, there was this like shining, this like radiance that we didn't even know about, but other people could see and were changed because of it. Right? So I think that's just, it's this quote that was also in the devotional, the app this morning, by Peter Marr, and it says, they say that I am crazy because I refuse to be crazy the way everyone else is crazy. And I think there's this sort of invitation to be in God's presence in a way that changes us and inspires change in others. So I really loved the prayer at the end of the app this morning. It said, Lord, help us to be foolish enough to stand for you, foolish enough to call upon you, and foolish enough to wait on you. And then along those lines, again, this reinforced idea of that the psalmist talks about in Psalm 105, make known his deeds among the peoples, speak of all his marvelous works. And so my hope and prayer for us this morning is that we would be so engaged and in the presence of God and know who he is and know what he has done, so that we are changed because of it, whether or not we realize it, but that as we are changed and as we go out into the world, people see that we're crazy in a way that that they're not used to, that they don't understand, that inspires change, that inspires questioning and curiosity, that we'd be foolish enough to stand for all that God is, to call upon him, to wait on him, to make known his deeds, to speak of his marvelous works, and inspired by the 2 Thessalonians 1 verse 11, my prayer would be that God would make us worthy of our calling, and that by his power he may bring to fruition our every desire for goodness and our every deed prompted by faith, so that we might, again, our own renewal in God would be for the sake of partnering with God in the renewal of all things in this world. So those are my thoughts and prayers for this morning. I hope you guys will join me along in that. And then the prayer calendar for today is that we as a church would be praying for people suffering from social isolation, particularly those who suffer from depression or anxiety, and those who need routines for stability. Just a reminder, the prayer calendar, the devotional Zoom link, and also the app that we're following, all that stuff is available on the website, allthingsnew.church. So check that out, and we'll see you tomorrow.